first tier list of the new generation coming right at you. It's finally time to take a look at the tier list for the first set of G, which is basically Generation Stride. It had support for only 3 clans, which was Gears, Royals, and Kagero, and then we had a clan event for Nova Grappler, which was also included into this meta because it released somewhere midway through. The meta's been really interesting and very fun to play, that's for sure, but of course some decks are going to be better than others, and there's definitely quite the pattern when we're looking at decks that were really strong in the TCG and looking at what's actually strong here in Zero too. Now without any further ado, let's take a look at what the Japanese tier lists are looking like, and then we'll take a look at my own. So first things first, this is the game width tier list that we always take a look at the start of the tier list video. So they're basically saying that from the new decks, the tier 1 is of course Overlord the Cross as an overwhelming number 1, and then Blade Master they also put in tier 1, which I've seen some people disagree with, especially on the English side. Then in tier 2 they put Chronojet and Altmile, and then they didn't put the Novas in here itself, but you can see the Victor is also seen as tier 2. So generally speaking, they're tier 1 from the old decks. They also have duos still in here together with Brawlers, which I definitely agree with. Duos also gained the new Heal Guardians, which is another defensive option for them, so that is definitely pretty good. And then for the tier 2, we see that, you know, Chronojet Altmile are definitely at the top, together with Revengers. Still with Perditions, I really don't see them at all in ladder, so I'm not sure how to rate them, to be honest. Here, let me zoom in a little bit. And then they also put Seekers as well as Jewel Knights here, so I guess this is mixed with Altmile. And then of course, they also put Bluish Flames, which I'm quite surprised about. They're still not sleeping on Link Joker or like Starbase as a whole. The leaders I think definitely deserve to be knocked down a peg because they literally are countered by striding, which every single clan can do with the generic elemental strides now. So I think that this needs to be reevaluated a little bit, but that's enough. You know, we've taken a look at the first 2 tiers for the JP side. Now let's take a look at mine. So here are the categories we're going to be working with today. As always, I've kept the best decks as well as highly competitive for the actual dogs, like the top of the meta. Then honestly, there hasn't been much variety in ladder lately. It's been mostly people playing with the new decks, which is completely understandable because everybody wants to play with the new cards, especially the G fans have been waiting for these units for this whole, these last 2 years basically. So I'm gonna split them up in things that seem theoretically good but don't pop up much on ladder or rarely do, and things that are viable, seem okay, decent, but don't really pop up much, and then stuff that's actually kind of struggling. So we're gonna go through the old decks quite quickly. This should be good. This should still be good, but you don't really see it. This got Victor support, so I've seen a couple Blau Victor lists pop up here and there, so somewhere around here. Seekers I think with Altmile support are pretty decent. Yggdrasil seems fine. Risers I actually do see here and there, genuinely I see Riser Victor pop up here and there. Angels don't really see it, but should be viable, right? Same for golds, I think they should also be viable. Now these things, I don't want to spend too much time talking about them because there hasn't been many additions to them, right? And the strides that, for example, Seekers got are cool, and the generic cards they got are cool, but they're not super game changing, I guess. Same for Novas as well, right? These are just good decks that can splash the new stuff in, but they're not fantastic. Revengers I think are still gonna be one of the better decks, purely because it's always gonna be strong. You just have a very strong break right turn, and now you can sit on Mordred, go into the generic elemental strides while you wait for the break right turn, and then build up resources that way for the big push turn with your Phantom Blaster Abyss. So for that reason, I think that Shadows will always be highly competitive. Honestly, Shadows is just one of Bushiroad's most beloved clans at this point. They love to give them good support, they love to make them strong, and throughout G, when Luard comes out and when Orgeyser comes out, they will continue to be very strong, especially with Diablo. This one's kind of funny. So Witches in Zero call out, I put them here for now, but Witches in Zero, they call out grade 3s, right, from the top 10, but now people are playing less and less grade 3s, right, because first they're playing grade 0 heal triggers, and some decks are playing grade 0 crit triggers, so that leaves potentially only 5 grade 3s on a deck sometimes, and because of that, Witches have less and less targets and feel a little bit like a struggle to me. Honestly, I don't see the deck at all. I've run into it once in the entire month on ladder, but I don't know, to me this feels like it might be in a little bit of a problem. I feel like they might need to buff it again and just give them the ability to also choose any triggers from the top of your opponent's deck, not just grade 3s, right? So I'm gonna put it here for now because I feel just mechanically they got screwed over. DP, I guess viable. DI too, these decks just don't really pop up. They can use generic strides and they're fine. Nemuel I definitely think is still very, very strong, and I think deserves to be at the top. I wouldn't put it in like tier 1 best personally, just because it hasn't really been popping up that much, but when it does, it still feels very strong and annoying like it always has been. And I think if you're going into a tournament, it's definitely a viable pick, especially because Bermuda is actually releasing next week as well. Aquaforce, interestingly enough, there's a guy, one of the top players from the Zero Championships on Twitter. He's been only playing Aquaforce and ladder and nothing else before the Thaba support, and he's been like doing really well with them, but I don't see it at all. I never run into it. I'm pretty sure he's the only person in ladder that's like running with it, and I don't know what the magic is, but cool, I guess. Spikes in theory should be still pretty decent, and like just being to blow up your opponent. You know, you can like sit on Bat and Dragger now and go into the generic strikes to like farm up resources and then go for the combo kill when you're at break ride. So in theory it should be quite good, but again, don't really see it. Link Joker in theory should be amazing in this current meta, because all of these new G decks actually don't have many ways to fight against lock. They usually have anti-retire, but they don't carry much resist. They don't usually carry like anti-lock either. Everybody's been kind of like taking out their anti-Link Joker cards right now, but nobody really plays Link Joker, so it feels like you're safe. But actually I feel like if somebody does decide to bring it, I'll put Blaster Joker here as well. It should be pretty good. I feel like it should still be very viable, but you just don't really see it at all. Seekers and Jewel Knights are both kind of like ult mile variants to me that seem quite good, but I think it's so maybe like something like this, to be honest. Like especially the Jewel Knight variant seems quite cool because you can make nice combos with Sword Me off of like Gablade and things like that. So I think that if you pair Altmile with Jewel Knights, it actually seems like a pretty strong build in my opinion. So I'll put it somewhere up here. Bluish Flames, now that this is kind of interesting, right? Because you also don't really see it. Like honestly, don't see it at all and haven't run into gold a single time this month. But in theory, if I were to say, because this is a deck that forces your opponent to randomly discard grade 3 or higher while PGing, decks run less grade 3s now, right? But the thing is that they don't say that you can't guard, they say you can't sentinel, so you can still use your grade 0 heal guardians against them. But that means that maybe the Bluish Flame decks might now start to go into the path of playing something like, you know, Bruno and stuff like that gains power for you as well, so that you're actually swinging with a Prominence Glare that is huge and also has bonus crits and guard restrict, so that even your opponent's heal guardians can actually protect them. And that will start to feel like really the classic Bluish Flames, so I wouldn't sleep on Bluish Flames too much. This might actually have some potential, so definitely keep that in mind. I think Perditions, again, don't really see them that much. I see the Great splashed into like the Blade Master decks here and there, and I think it should have some potential, so maybe up here. It's still a strong deck, and it can use the powerful G-Zone that Kagero has, and like using the actual like Mustafa. If you don't have like 4 cards in Drop Zone yet, you can also use stuff like the Root Flare as well to just get rid of your opponent's columns and proc your on retire effects, because you do have a Perdition Vanguard even when you stride over them. So I think that maybe the Great does have some good potential too. Now Brawlers I think are definitely one of the best decks. Like Brawlers literally can stomp the majority of matchups still. They don't have a single stride. They literally don't have a single G era card outside of the new heal guardians, which they fit in very nicely by the way, but they're still a menace. I see them on ladder pretty often. They're a pretty common deck to face against, and I think overall like just really good. Brawlers are still good for the same reasons they were good beforehand. Nothing made them worse, and also like nothing around them counters them either, so it's like, you know, if you know how to play against it, it's you're gonna do well, but at the same time it feels like if you don't, you're still gonna get screwed. I feel like Deleters also kind of like jumped into like a struggle category, because poor Deleters, man, Stride as a mechanic counters them. Stride as a mechanic says that when you stride, if you have a deleted Vanguard, it turns it face up first and then you stride over it, so you literally counter delete by striding. So Deleters will get support in the future, like 2 or 3 waves I think, and that will make them better. That will make them be able to fight against Stride decks very well, but for the time being, it's a little rough. I'm gonna tell you that much. It's a little bit rough in my opinion, and I don't know. Like, you know, you go first, you delete them, and it's like, what, they're gonna stride over you? Like, it's, I don't know, man. They don't even need to rewrite. They don't need to rewrite to actually proc that skill, unless they like buff delete by saying like your opponent needs to discard 1 before they stride and ride. So I don't know, that could have some potential, but right now it feels kind of like a funny struggle. Mega Colony, see, Mega Colony is interesting because if you stride over a rested Vanguard, it stays rested, right? So somehow Mega Colony is struggling a bit less, which is really funny to say. Like, I think these decks are probably still quite viable because this has lock, and like like this has like, I guess, nah, they're really struggling. So I don't know, like these decks don't really pop up here and there, so I'm going to put them over here. It's kind of funny how this ends up, but at least this is my opinion. Again, this is my take on the meta. This is what I've been seeing so far in the ladder and like seeing over this month. But now finally getting on to the actual G era decks, we're going to start with Chronojet. Chronojet, in my opinion, is definitely, I agree with the Japanese side, it's a very highly competitive deck. It has lots of board control. It doesn't retire, so it gets around all the like anti-retire effects, but doesn't get around resist. It has plenty of guard restrict in like Chronojet, Ragnarok, the actual like the Legion Mate, the double rare that has resist, like so much guard restrict. You also have just the ability to like toolbox for so many things with things like Fate Rider. You have the most flexible G-zone so far of all the different clans, but it is a little bit slow sometimes to build up to its win cons, and it feels like, you know, if your opponent's smart, they can kind of play around the different guard restricts, and sometimes you have to really think about, like, keep track of your opponent's PGs and heal guards to think, like, do I stay on Chronojet? Do I go into Ragnarok? And things like that for the late game. So I think it's, like, on the cusp of being here, on the cusp of being at the best decks, but it still kind of, like, suffers from, you know, some of its, like, early game strides not being super fantastic. Like, you can Mystery Flare meme if your opponent gives you 4 damage, or you can like go for Chronos Command if your opponent overcommits a board, which is nice, but then like, you know, it feels like it needs a little bit more, but right now it's still very, really good. Like, it's at a perfect level. Like, that's how strong decks should be. Like, I think this level is like what the meta feels nice at, and this is just a little bit overkill. Blademaster, I think, ranks somewhere around here. It's very retire reliant, and it's like every single effect, not every single effect, but a lot of effects in the deck are very much like, oh, if you retired something, get power, or if you retired something, do this. And when your opponent doesn't really commit much, or they commit resist units, you don't really retire much, so that makes it a little bit difficult. And Blademaster having the GB2 to gain a crit is nice and all, but all of your retire is kind of like built into striding. So it's like, if you don't stride and you don't have a way to retire, if you don't play stuff like, you know, Berserk or whatever, then chances are that you're not going to retire much, and then this GB2 won't actually fulfill itself because you didn't retire things, so you have to attack into intercepts first, I guess, and then you have the crit. So it's a little bit weird at times. It's still a strong deck. I think it's still very, very strong, and people in my comments on the Blademaster deck and fight said, like, yeah, this deck is still very good, but I think that, you know, maybe goes in somewhere around here. Like, it's not, in my opinion, as good as Chronojet, because it's just a little bit lackluster, and a lot of stuff running around now does have anti-retire too. Now, Altmile, I think, ranks just around here together with Chronojet. Really strong combo-based deck, in my opinion. Like, Same Blows and Amazing Stride, giving you anti-retire on top of everything is really cool for the Kagero matchups, which are very popular right now. On top of that, you have really cool multi-attack potential and like good power scaling in order to actually, like, you know, put your opponent from 2 to 5, 2 to 6, just like that. And I think for that reason, it's really cool. And overall, it's just like a really nice start already for Altmile in this meta, because they ported over some cards from set 2 and set 4 even. So like Tech Goal, which I think is really, really good and a good decision on Game Studio's part. So Altmile, I think, ranks like pretty closely to Chronojet in my opinion overall as well. We'll talk about Victor first. I think he also comes around just here. Really, really strong deck when things go right. You don't need to commit much in the early game, and you can basically use stuff like Golden Anglet and Cool Hank to just like make cool scaling combos. And like Yamato no Drake, you play like 9 draws to draw into your pieces, and you always have like reliable ways to stride because you run less grade zeros. And in general, you just have like more things to attack with, more things to pressure with. You just have to play it a bit carefully. And unfortunately, Kagero is quite popular right now in the meta, and Runbull doesn't have like anti-retire for whatever reason. So Victor can get kind of screwed over by the Kagero matchup. So we've seen a lot of players play Brutal Jack now, because Brutal Jack has anti-retire built into himself to protect the whole column. So I think Victor is actually very strong and has really strong potential to like 2 to 6 your opponent, or like push him to 5, then you go into Victor Plasma to try to like seal the game. So I wouldn't sleep on Victor. Definitely very strong, and lots of different variants of it as well, so do keep that in mind. And finally, by far the best deck of them all right now is Mr. The Cross. And yeah, look at this. Look, the Tier Maker website is telling you to follow me. Please go follow. We're almost at 10k follows. But the Cross is just everything you would ever want. Like, it's the same as in TCG. You have the best Legion in the game, arguably, that has on hit restand Vanguard, on not hit kill 2 of your opponent's units, which against some matchups can be very nasty. It has a grade 1 that lets you Soul Blast 2 to Countercharge 2, which means you can Legion, swing, then ride over the Legion with another The Cross, Soul Blast out your The Cross in the end that you rode over, and then just put them back into the deck with Legion while countercharging and refunding your cost for the end, and just like looping those Legions. And then when your opponent's at 5, just stride, go into your Mustafa, go into your Root Flare. You have all these options. You can play Burnout, you can play Berserk, you have all these other ways to retire stuff. On top of that, like, you can play filter cards like Gojo, you have like Striken if you want to go for like the high roll, like Striken into the Cross for like that 27k 2 crit double bash. This deck just has it all. This deck just has it all, and it definitely feels like the top of the meta. And I kind of hope that when we get the next set with Aquaforce, Bermuda, and Neonectar, it brings it a little bit closer to the cross, but I kind of doubt it. I feel like we might have to go through the Zero Championship at the end of November before we see any kind of like potential hits to these decks, which I could kind of see maybe Grom getting nerfed to only like countercharge 1 or something, because it's honestly like the Soul Blast 2 do something cards that were always the problems. In the cross and the TCG, it was Calamity Tower, which was Soul Blast 2 draw card, which let you recycle your legions. In Zero, it's Grom, which is Soul Blast 2 countercharge 2, which lets you recycle your legions and also recycle the cost. So yeah, this is basically how I think about the meta right now. I hope that my explanations were like plentiful enough. Some decks I definitely skipped over because I just don't have much to say about them. And then some decks I feel like it's just because of the mechanics, I guess, and how their mechanics are. It's not like G's mechanics, it's how their mechanics of these decks interact with G, and I think they just need to be patched in order to make them like more viable. That's all. Game Studio, just do the thing, you know? So yeah, that's my take on the meta. Hope you guys liked the video. I tried to put more detail into it today as well, so I hope you guys get something out of that. As always, if you like the video, please do give it a like. If you like the content, please do also subscribe. We're getting close to 50k subscribers, so I really want to like keep pushing till we get there before I move to Japan next year. On top of that, I also stream on Twitch. If you want to see more Vanguard Zero content, make sure to head over to the Twitch link in the description, and also have a second channel where I upload stuff that's not related to Vanguard, like other card games and mobile games that I play. But anyway, that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.